Good morning and welcome back to the Explicit Measures podcast with Tommy, Seth, and Mike. Good morning, everyone. How's everyone doing today?
Good morning, gentlemen, and happy Tuesday to you. Oh,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
Love it. Just to be very clear here, we've had a couple episodes. People are traveling. This is an episode that's occurring during Microsoft Ignite. So Tommy and I are at the event, Microsoft Ignite, so we won't be able to do this one live. So this is a recorded episode, just for you, for your awareness. But that being said, Tommy, do we have an announcement around this? Like, I guess it would be tomorrow after recording this at Microsoft Ignite.
Dude, we have a new user group going on, and it's going to be in Chicago. It is going to be in person. No internet required, but suggested, I guess. So we're going to be at the Chicago Microsoft building. It's right across the Prudential building, right off of Randolph Street. And we have a representative from Microsoft speaking, and we're going to have an awesome time.
And I believe our topic is going to be from, trying to remember the gentleman's name. Getting the name, drop the name off the top of my head. But we're going to be talking, the topic for our user group, we'll be talking about the admin monitoring solution. Yeah. So there's the admin monitoring workspace where we're going to talk all about, he's going to give us, he's the PM for the feature. And he's going to be going deep dive on all the features around admin monitoring. How does it work? Some of the backend, some of the infrastructure, what's their plans? So just kind of some general things around the admin monitoring section. So if you are an admin and you see the little extra workspace, this is the PM from this team. So literally the name's going to come to me halfway through this podcast. I'm just going to blurt it out here when I remember it. It's I don't know why it's escaping me this morning.
Not enough coffee for you this morning?
I think I need some more coffee. That's for sure. All right. That being said, we don't have any other really announcements. Tommy, give us the main details around your topic. The topic today is going to be more topics around using domains and maybe picking on a little bit of, should a domain have a specific leader? And so maybe talking about that topic a bit more, but going a bit deeper on domains and seeing all the features that are coming out from domains here inside your Power BI ecosystem. Tommy, give us some more context.
Did you guys mention the time? Did I just miss that?
The time?
Oh, 6 p.m.
The time, 6 p.m. Time of the meetup.
Yes. Sorry.
6 p.m. at the
just show up in Chicago randomly. It will be
just show up.
Just
any old time.
Put it on loop every day. He'll just start presenting at 8 a.m. and then okay.
You
so
show
6
Sorry.
p.m. Got it.
6 p.m. So
that is your normal user group time, right, Tommy?
If you go to Meetup, you should see the link to register. That should be all available especially by now. If you're joining, so you can get all the details there as well. So super exciting.
You also noticed the Chicago user group under a little bit of rebranding. So now it's not just the Chicago Power BI user group. It's now the Chicago Power BI and Fabric user group. There is limited availability at the event, so you have to make sure you sign up. They won't let everyone in. We need names of people to get into the office there just for security things as well. So make sure if you are planning on attending and you're coming to Ignite, make sure you sign up. I believe also Alex Powers will also be there as well. So if you want to go hang out with Alex Powers, he'll probably be there as well. Excellent. Okay. Anyways, sorry, didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead, Tommy.
Let's dive in. So these are the conversations I really love to have with you guys, because we know about Microsoft Fabric domains, an admin setting that kind of organizes your content on top, a level up of the workspace. But one of our previous conversations that we've had about this was, well, what does it actually look like from a governance point of view? Not just the technical implementation of a domain, but what does that actually mean for the team? And I think one of the things we've always said too, if there's really no meaning behind it, if there's really no responsibility behind it, does it actually have value or weight on an organization or on a team? So with that in mind, our conversation today is this concept of the domain and how does it integrate with adoption and governance? More importantly, should domains have leaders? What is the role of a domain leader if you're going to implement that at your organization?
I think I'm going to have to push on you hard here, Tommy, to define your definition of what is a leader for an organization or a part of this, because this is one of the things
start.
Yeah, I think I'm just going to unpack, like, what do you mean by leader? What does that definition look like? Is that has to be a manager? Is that someone who has to manage people? Is that someone that you're just saying, okay, you own this department, maybe you don't manage people, that you're like I'm in the quality department and I'm the senior quality person in that department. Like, so can you help me maybe unpack the leader term, and then maybe I can have some more context around where to go with the domains.
Yeah, and I'll even back up besides the role of the company, whether they're a manager or not. Honestly, when you think of a leader, especially in this space, we're talking about someone who has sway and has responsibility. Someone who can make decisions for that team or domain, but also has responsibility behind it. I want to keep it a little vague, at least here, because I think
Okay.
a lot of this will adapt here. But I think the two critical aspects that you're going to need to have to call yourself a leader of a domain is you have decision making capabilities, but you also have responsibilities that you have to take care of.
It's interesting that you make a note like that, because I was immediately thinking of a domain leader being someone who's a manager of people. That's where I first went my thought. But I think the way you're defining it now actually leaves it a bit more open for interpretation.
Yeah.
Maybe you could be a PM of a project or an area of the business, and you're trying to hold the responsibility of getting things done or accomplished, not necessarily having direct reports, but you're in that role. Or this could be someone who, of your team members, you're the one who's been there the longest, the most senior, or you're the one who's used Power BI the longest. Maybe they nominate you to be kind of like, okay, you're going to be the technical expert / leader of our engineering team, and you're going to manage who has in and out of what inside PowerBI.com. Okay, interesting. I have another thought on this that's totally separate, but I'm going to hang on to it until a little bit later. Talk about it. Seth, what do you think?
I'm with you guys so far.
Cool.
Great. Well, thanks for listening to the episode. That was really good. Appreciate your time today.
Mike, you can't ask Seth that question until 45 minutes in.
That's true.
If we're 10 minutes in, he's just going to go, sure, I haven't thought yet.
I like the definition so far.
Okay.
And I would agree that it's the appropriate one for saying leaders and domains. If we're going to be as open as we need to be with the structure of how you would go about building.
I guess the question is, was there any leader definition? Like, do you agree with the leader definition? It sounds like you do. Yeah. But was there anything else you would add to it? Like, how else would you see it in your mind? Or maybe not. Maybe that's what you would interpret it as.
I would maybe throw in that they are also one of the subject matter expert areas. Right? Like
SMEs.
Yeah, if part of a domain, you should have knowledge about the domain, or I suppose be an admin, but we're not really talking about that.
Sure.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point too, because one thing to make crystal clear, the domain leader is not something sanctioned by Microsoft. I believe that's not anywhere in the documentation. This has been from our conversation, so I think that's also kind of a good brainstorming here too. Seth, I think it's important too that we specify it's not just an admin, right? Because I think we talk about that side so much and what an admin is, where a domain may not that they're not touching Microsoft Fabric as much, but I think there's a lot of different aspects of what a domain leader is going to be responsible of, rather than just the administration side. It's not a lower level of administration, at least in my head.
I think one of the things. So I agree with you, Tommy. I'm going to maybe transition the thought here. My thought I was going to hold on to a little bit earlier was domains, and what we're talking about here is there is a delegation of responsibility occurring. We're saying we're going to allow you to be responsible for this thing, whatever the topic may be. And I think that's what a lot of companies struggle with, this delegation of responsibility and letting other teams follow through with delivering the data that they need back to the organization. I think this is just a very hard thing to do. And I think that's what sometimes there's been this mentality of, we're going to build the business intelligence team, and it's this centralized team that everything gets run through. That is an approach. That is one way. It's like a top-down, very centralized approach. But then I think now with Power BI, the way Power BI kind of rolled out to organizations, I feel like a lot of the Power BI pieces started in the business, and the business is trying to drive their little initiatives. And at some point, businesses come back and say, look, we've got all this stuff happening in Power BI. How do we organize it so that we can have better responsibility, right? You have to integrate with corporate BI or corporate data team, right? Because they're going to be producing data for multiple organizations and teams. Okay, great. Well, how do we give the individual teams autonomy to build what they need to build for their business unit, but yet still, they need to have responsibility. So whatever they produce in reports, has to be trusted because they're doing the work. But we need a process to click back and say, hey, something's not right. I'm questioning this data. Can you give us some help? And that team has to kind of be willing to support it if you're going to take this federated approach. So that's kind of where I'm playing my mind here a little bit on this domains thing. It feels like domains is another one of these areas I'm going to grant access or delegate responsibility to a certain team.
I like that point because there's so much back and forth with business intelligence, right? Like in Fabric, we talk about a lot of central team, right? Like the BI team engaging with the business. But in this case, if you start adopting the methodologies of data mesh and Fabric, right? Like this is almost doing the opposite, where the business partners or the business people that have been building things in their ecosystem now at least get an inkling or want to scale in some way or understand that there's capabilities that they can leverage now even more in their particular areas, and they have to lean back into technology, which is kind of normal, right? It's business has requests from technology, but in this case I think it just offers another opportunity to data mesh together where technology is bringing the structures and the management and the organization of all of the things, right? Because if there's directives to say, hey, we've had this Power BI environment, like we've got all of this stuff all in all these places, managing this now and starting to separate these things out into constructs for the business via domains is a great way to one, maybe potentially clean up an environment, but also just set the standard of like, hey, who should have access to these things? Who's the owner? And then like do what domains are supposed to do, which is consolidate, this information into areas where the people that know the most about the business eventually begin to manage it.
So I want to just kind of keep pointing on things here. If you read the article that comes out, so there is a domain design best practices that article Microsoft has produced. I don't know how new this is. I'm going to go look at the article here. It was October 16th, 2024. So this is fairly recent article produced by Microsoft. So I'll put this in the chat window here, or actually down in the description that way in case you want to see it later on. Here's the article. But if you look in this article, this is when you look up domains or Google domains, it has like what is a domain first, and then there's this article. And I think, Seth, this is actually speaking a lot to your point here. In the planning section, it talks about, here are some questions you need to think about. Who's responsible for the data? What is the best structure for your organization? And is there some sort of hierarchy level of your org that you care about? Mm-hmm. And so I like that organization. And then it goes through a couple like pictures of just saying, here's how you may want to see your organization. Here's some common examples of how companies are laid out. You have the CEO, and you have by department, sales, finance, marketing, HR. That would be a way of thinking about these are domains. So HR would be the domain, marketing would be the domain. Potentially you have like by product line. So the CEO is the top, and then you have like these different product lines: health, beauty, food, admin, and finance, right? So it could be broken up by what product are you building? And that way each product team can kind of run themselves. And there's some shared services at the the admin and finance level, right? So human resources, IT, those are shared services, but everything else is kind of localized. Each team has their own R&D, marketing, and sales team because that's how they broke out their company. Go ahead, Tommy.
I was going to say one of the drawbacks there too, and it's funny if you're actually just scrolling quickly through those diagrams. Mm-hmm. One of the diagrams, it says health and beauty. I'm like, I thought we were talking about Power BI. This is an example organization. So I was like, beauty, like not this podcast. But one of the drawbacks there too, especially if you're going to that product line, is that you're dealing with what they call like duplication of functions. Because if you have multiple kind of products, they probably have marketing on each of those.
Yes, correct. Because they're marketing specifically for their area. So exactly. There could be a marketing team around just, it depends on how large you are of a company. Yeah. Like if you're, I'm trying to think of a big manufacturing company that makes a lot of things. But if you're a big manufacturer, you're going to have a lot of different product lines that maybe or may not make sense based on.
Right.
So you're probably going to market those things. And this is where I think this is interesting to me, because now is the domain the health? And then underneath that, you have subdomains of research and development and marketing. So this is where things I think get a little bit more interesting, and like how you want to potentially think about the domain structure, because you probably would want that. I'm not going to share a whole bunch of things between health team and the beauty team or the food team and the other different teams. It's going to be kind of not siloed, but you're going to need that team to operate together.
And what I like about that article is each of the diagrams or each of the approaches, they talk about kind of the positive, then what the drawbacks are. This kind of goes a point in your favor, Mike, when you were talking about what the envisionment of a leader is, because I'm still stuck in that in my head on kind of two questions that we can mull on later, where who actually designates someone a leader and what are they actually responsible for. But really from the diagram approach, or at least these approaches point of view, it would make sense as of now in my head for this person to be a manager or someone in that capacity.
And I think this is maybe the distinction here slightly, is I'm just trying to unpack what this means. I think Microsoft, their lens of, again, you can use domains however you think is best in your company. The patterns seem to be align larger teams of people together under the domains. And so I think if now that you said that, Tommy, I think what I'm thinking here is a domain is a collection of workspaces. It's not just one workspace. It's not like that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about, 10, 15, 20, 100 people in a department, and all of them are trying to either work together on the same data, or there are some people in that department that are building data that are going to give to other people, right? Here's, sales and marketing need to self-manage their advertising spend, what they're going to do for advertising, what's the new promotion, what are competitors doing in promotion, right? They're going to have their own set of dashboards. They're going to be all like around their department, their team of people to communicate that. The sales team is going to have a whole, this is one that seems very common to me. If you have people out in the street running sales all the time, they're trying to like get things on their phones to give them data that they need. Here's a customer one pager, right? Here's the customer one pager for this. So you log in, here's your customer, you see your one pager, and then all the data is there. So this to me makes sense. Like that, all that should live underneath the sales domain. And there may be like multiple workspaces there.
Not just multiple workspaces, but especially in some of these very large companies, this domain subdomain model works.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Where you have these larger chunks. I think what's important about it is, and I like the best practices article here, because these concepts should align to how the business operates. Right. And the only time you ever get off that rail is when there's a fundamental shift of how the business operates, which is not going to happen very often or at all. Yeah. Right. So it's pretty solid to go like, we're going to create a domain under this thing, and then here are the subdomains. The other thing that's interesting about this conversation is it seems like saying a leader of a domain we're not talking about a specific permission, right?
No.
We're talking about a role that has to go along or should go along with this. And that being the subject matter expert role that can speak to the business of all the data underneath and what's going on in that domain. Because you have to remember, like we're creating an ecosystem of data, right?
Yes.
One of the whole pushes of data mesh, as opposed to centralized, right, is in a centralized approach, you have the teams that are consolidating the data into the same location. It's fantastic. It's great. What is one of the biggest challenges with those teams? You've got to find all the information of like, what's the business logic? How do you shape it? How do you create facts and dimensions? How do you make it useful for the business? And in an architecture where you're separating that out, it's a matter of those technical resources, potentially the same ones, depending on the size of the company, right? Engaging with the owners or the leaders of each of these domains. But there's, to Tommy's point, there's responsibility that those people have to make sure that the data artifacts or what's being built is accurate. And that's, I think, one of the most important parts of one of these architectures where you're separating things out, is if you're sharing data with the rest of the organization, it has to have gone through some vetting. You're monitoring in some way, because ultimately at the end of the day, it's not just the responsibility of the BI team, right? It's the responsibility of the organization. And I think that's what the biggest shift into data mesh architecture theories is this this forces or should force organizations to understand that data is a shared responsibility. And when you're in a framework that creates this ability for us to build domains against the structure of the organization, organize things in such a way that 100%, like, there should be a field for like
So
owners of domain so that people know who to talk to.
So I'm not, the word pushback is probably not the right word to use, but let me say there's a few things I need to know before I'm going to completely agree with that.
Uh-oh.
So no, I don't want to use the word
Okay.
pushback. And here's where I'm struggling with.
Seek more questions. All right.
Seek more
Seek more
questions.
questions. Yeah. We're just going to seek some more information here.
Curious kind of thing. So
Information finding.
this domain leader, then I think the two things I'm trying to figure out in order for that to, I think, be the most applied is, one, what is the technical or what are the skills of this leader? Like, what do they know in the data space? And then two, who's assigning that person the domain leader? And the reason I'm asking those two questions here is because based on the assignment here, especially if we look at those approaches in the best practices design, we know the common thing where the higher up you go, if this person's a manager or higher up, they might not know all the aspects of Fabric or the way the data is supposed to operate. So I think a big part here is, what is that person supposed to know? And I think that this leader, what are they supposed to know? What, not just about the business, because we're obviously assuming they know the business, they know the flow of the business.
Sure.
But if they're the domain leader, then what is their minimum required knowledge or expertise in this space? If we're going to task them with being the domain leader,
Yes.
what are they responsible for? So what should they know?
Oh God, that's a great question. What should you expect them to know?
What,
Or what will
that's
they
probably
know?
a perfect way to put it.
But
Yeah,
I would go after what you would expect them to know.
Yeah,
I think there may be a gap. So to your point here, I think you're touching on the great questions. I do want to answer the question. Seth, I think your question was also very revealing. Like, what should they know? I think we go after that one, because if they don't know it, who's the one to teach them how to do it? Which I think comes out of the center of excellence. That's what I think that's where that shit comes from. I think, Tom, to your second question here, who is assigning the domain leadership role? I also think that comes out of the center of excellence, where they're saying, look, this is what we think is the best plan for our organization. Does leadership agree with this? And the CEO or the invested, stakeholder, right? Whoever the one who's saying we're going to do things with Power BI, they're showing up and saying, yes, this does make sense for what we're going to do it, right? And now it's like, okay, great. Now we have the charter. We can now go find the people in the business that do these things. Sorry, Seth, go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt your question.
No, you're not. You're not. I think I there are three questions in there, right? One is what should they know, what or do they know? What technical skills do they need to have, and who's assigning the domain leader? I agree with Mike. Hopefully the organization is, right? Whether that's a COE, whether, like, if you have the structures, it's who owns the area. And maybe that's a shared thing, because the buck has to stop with somebody. And that's usually going to be somebody who's managing somebody, or a leader that manages managers. However, to your point, are they the actual subject matter experts? Hopefully. But do they know as much as some of their analysts or people in the mix on a daily basis? No. So is it the person who knows the most?
Not in all cases. Like maybe.
But that's what I'm saying. So maybe as a graduating that, like, I would say it also depends on the size of the organization. I'm looking for somebody who understands the business. As that were to grow, I think it's expanded to the person who is responsible, right? Mm-hmm. Where they have a person or other people that are in the mix every single day, right? I don't look at the owner of a domain as a technical. Also, same thing. That I see them as a subject matter expert, not necessarily the technical expert of an area, because I think domains are rolled out in different ways depending on the size of the organization. And what should they know? They should know how data works, right? They should know how to create good data sets for the rest of the organization. They should know how to test to ensure that their own data is good. Is that with assistance? Maybe, right? Ideally not, right? Where you can actually pour through your own data, you're analyzing it, you're doing things with it to make sure that it's dialed in, solving problems in source systems, et cetera, et cetera. So should they be data savvy? Absolutely. Are they all?
Maybe.
No.
Quick pause though. I'm changing my company's tagline to Pulley BI Consulting. We know how data works. So
you mean I know how data works.
It's not better with we.
I know, I get it.
So I'm thinking about that, Seth, and I'm thinking about this in maybe a larger organization, but I mean, do they need to know exactly how data works, or could they kind of be like a executive sponsor junior, like a diet executive sponsor?
Well,
Are they the Coke Zero of executive sponsors?
Yeah. I'm thinking this is someone like, so as Seth was saying that, I'm thinking in my head, like, what roles did I have in the past where I was I was not writing the code or doing the technical things, but I was heavily involved with the data products. Like I was a product manager of a data product. So I wasn't necessarily in the weeds of like writing the code of the APIs to get the data in and out of the data vault. But what I was involved with was coordinating different teams and making sure, okay, what team A, what are you doing? Team B, what are you deploying? Okay, how are we taking the code from the developers and how are we getting it into a CI/CD pipeline to get things released? Okay, great. Now that we have this thing in place, okay, now we have to go to our users of our platform and say, we need to communicate to you. Here's what we're doing. Here's how close we are to finishing. So I was constantly dealing with data all day, every day, but I wasn't necessarily writing or building to your point, Seth, the technical solution person, but I was involved with every aspect of where does the data come from? How do we communicate it to our external customers? I mean, I was being the interface between my department and other departments who need to consume our product or have information from us. So I think maybe some of that, Seth, is where it's like, this is the person that's kind of that interface between one team and potentially other teams where you know very detailed, what data product or data things you're dealing with. You don't have to build them all, but you're the one who understands the scope of that. And I think to your point, Seth, one of the skills should be they should be comfortable communicating about data. Like, what are the needs? What data do we have? They should know what data products are already in that department, whatever that may be, right? What things should they be thinking about data? And then that person should also have empathy for those external departments and saying, okay, because of that, here's the kind of things we should be building. And then that helps them own the domain for, okay, which users have access? How are we building apps? I think it's more of the technical side of like the deployment part of Power BI. I would expect this person to know that stuff.
I think it's two things, right? And the reason I say that is because for me, the knowledge about the area is the most important. But will that eventually evolve into somebody who also has the technical experience? Absolutely could. And
sure.
And the reason I say that is, if I'm looking at Fabric and I'm a small company, it's likely that the central team, there's going to be a small little team that if you do things, I would say, like how you would design this environment is to set up domains right away. Right? Because just as a way to separate out the areas of the business, so you can create the objects and the ETL and the data in those areas, because it's all landing in the same spot. It's just a great marker in your head and for the organization to think about those things. And then it's like, think about it. Like, I want to develop a bunch of reports for sales. Great. I'm already in that domain. Yep. I want to create things for marketing. Great. I'm already in that domain. Like, this is where I'm building the structure. So what do I need? I need feedback in all those areas. I'm not the expert. Yeah. I need knowledge. I need the person who has the knowledge. And so for the time being, like, they're my go-to. They're my subject matter expert for that domain. Whether or not the organization says, hey, person that we're picking, you're responsible for that domain. I don't, maybe, right? But maybe not. But that's where I go, like, instantly when you get into medium-sized orgs or as you're growing, should those domain owners be more data savvy? Should they understand what you're building for them? Maybe they have a person, right, that continues to accelerate and work with the central BI team. And then in the large, I think domains have their own full leaders. They're fully tech savvy. They have their own things. They're on their own path. What is most beneficial coming to the organization from that domain is the shared artifacts. But in all those, like how you separate out the ownership, I think there is a opportunity for organizations to say you're the person, you're the subject matter expert of this area, even if it is small and the central team is running the technical bits. You're responsible for making sure that the outputs are accurate.
And I'm going to lean on that angle, because I'm going to not shift gears, but I want you guys to look at this at a different angle with the domain leader. Because Mike, to your point, I love everything you said. I just think the good luck finding that for every domain, that type of person with that already experience. And you're also that there's the assumption there that there's already a well-running machine with all the widgets. And
No, I am not. I'm not. Those are not assumptions I'm
large
making.
org. It's large
or
org.
just large org. So
Well,
I think.
but I'm also saying, like, I'm not assuming that those. I'm saying these are what we think we should have in those roles,
sure.
right?
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is the center of excellence is responsibility for them to train up or educate people. And it's like there are people that know some of this, but maybe not what we're saying here is the standard, right? And the other thing I'll point out here too is domain owners can have the delegated permission of certifying their own data. I think that makes total sense. But the concept of what is a certified thing, an artifact, may be foreign to this person because we've never dealt with Power BI before. So I would fully assume, Tommy, we will probably not get the person with all the skills that we want to have in this role. However, the idea would be is the center of excellence should say, here's what this domain owner should be doing. You should be certifying data sets. You should be communicating to other teams and figuring out what data they need. You should be working internal to your team. And you should be that domain owner is the one who's saying, you're the one who's going to be responsible for making sure that these general center of excellence rules are being followed in your department. I'm delegating them to you. So when we do an audit and scan the whole tenant and say, look, we're going to see how many admins are on every single workspace. We expect 1 or 2 admins max. If we see a workspace with no contributors, no members, and all admins, we're going to say, whoop, timeout, flag. There's a problem here. And then we're going to go find where does that workspace in what domain, and then go back to the domain leader and say, look, I'm going to delegate to them. Hey, look, here's the list of workspaces that you have that are not compliant based on our center of excellence policies. Go fix it. Go work with those teams and identify, solve those problems. Because this stuff's going to get large. I mean, you talk about big organizations. There's going to be departments all over. There's going to be lots of these things. And like, you're not going to want to be that central one team. You'll be overwhelmed with all the stuff. The whole goal of this is to delegate those authorities to that domain. That's the point.
And 100% it's the point. Why do you have different architectures outside central? Because at some point in time, everybody in the organization wants something all at the same time, and there's not enough capacity to meet all the needs.
Yep.
However,
self-service.
I think you bring I think you bring up another really interesting point though, which is as you build these things out, or as you claim domains and separate them out and create leaders and owners, the organization itself has to have the framework for all of these teams to work well together.
Correct.
Because these are, or like, you're gonna have organizational objectives that require these teams or leaders to talk about their domain, share the information in their domain, understand and build new capabilities within their domain, because there's going to be other teams that are going to have needs, right? You're trying to distribute the load throughout the organization. And I think that's where, it really starts to impact things as you get into larger orgs where, man, this could be absolute chaos if you didn't, or you could have the same problems that you had earlier where, hey, guess what? Everybody needs, like 80% of all the data comes from this domain. They only have the same 2 people that everybody else does, but everybody else needs data from them. Right? Like, well, that's the same problem you have right now with centralized data, right? Like, so
then what are we doing?
So how you separate these things out or how you fund supporting them, I think becomes more of a conversation, which is a good thing.
And so this is a different way I want to look at this. And I think we've been looking downward from the domain leader downward to their responsibilities.
Okay.
But I want to challenge looking so-called upward, where I may even say this may be more important for this domain leader. especially when we talk about data governance. I'm working on a ton of projects right now, and it's basically like, what's that structure look like? Who has a seat at the table? And an argument could be made, and I'm leaning more and more this way, where domain leaders are those chairs on the data governance committee. How could you have a better person than a person who's part of that domain, who knows their business and their team, and they are part of the committee for data governance? So I think there's the other side of this, besides just what they're responsible for downward. The administration, to your point, how many, what's the members and contributors, what's the content in my workspace, but what are they voicing to the organization? What value are they bringing to the greater organization that I can also see this domain leader as? Because part of this is the incentive. We talked a lot about the responsibility, but why couldn't this person also be a seat at the table for data governance? Because they can then voice the greater organization or the greater data governance. Here are the problems that we're seeing. We need a lot more data engineering, or, we're struggling with getting X, Y, and Z. Because even if they're not the most technical savvy, they understand all their workspaces, all the problems that they're facing. We're struggling with X, Y, and Z, or we need more technical expertise here, or whatever that case may be. They actually have a voice, and now you have a representative from each part of the company, from someone who you've entrusted to kind of, in a sense, own that part of the company.
I like your point there, Tommy, because I do think the voice, and I'm going to rephrase what you said just so I unpack it a little bit for me.
It works for everyone. So,
right. So I think what you're saying is the voice of the domain owner is a voice that comes into the center of excellence.
Mm-hmm.
And it's basically the needs of that domain, right? So instead of us having to go into the domain or individual people in there and say, what do you want? What do you need? Like, what's the problem? What's the challenges? The expectation is the liaison between that group, right? Marketing inside, the food category, right? If that's the team we're talking to, that team needs to come back to through the domain owner. That's the channel of communication going back up to the center of excellence and say, look, everything's going well, but we're really struggling with certified data sets. Help us figure this out. What can we do better here? Or we're having all these proliferation of, we're running out of capacity in our fabric SKUs. Okay, what can we do to, like, that should be voicing that challenge back up to leadership, or even that center of excellence level. And center of excellence should say, okay, let's help you solve the problem. Like, that's the central team that's going to help you unblock or figure things out. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, and I think a bigger part of that too is, if the domain leaders are the people who you entrust to have the finger on the pulse, and I'm asking all my domain leaders something and I'm getting a very consistent answer, wow, that helps out the center of excellence to say, where do we prioritize our time? Where's the biggest focus? Because we're hearing from all of our domain leaders a very consistent theme.
I'm going to give you another really quick. What you're describing to me sounds like a book that I want to read, but I've only read like the summary part of it yet. So again, to be very clear, I haven't actually read the book yet. So it's on my reading list. It's going to get there. It's the book called Extreme Ownership. I think I've talked about this before.
Yeah,
it's Extreme Ownership by Jacko Wilkin, and he talks about one of the points here. He talks about decentralizing command and the idea of, like, you have to give other people responsibility. And I believe there's one in the book, I think this is where he talks about communicating up the chain and then also down the chain, right? So it can't always be communication from top down to everyone. There needs to be a nice level of transparency between the leaders in your domain area. They need to be able to say, look, I hear what you're saying. Here's where we're still struggling. Like, there needs to be a good communication back up that chain, back to those OKRs, or those key level goals and objectives.
And I think that's essential, because if I'm gonna assign Seth to be, hey, guess what? Congratulations, Seth, you're now domain leader of marketing or this product line, and you're responsible for all these things. Well, Seth's gonna go, great. Well, in a sense, what do I get out of this? Is there a pay rate? Like, there always has to be some incentive. Do I have a voice, or is my job just to make sure things work well without any value to that, to Seth or to that person?
I think you nailed the hammer on the head.
We're all doing great with words. Yeah.
You've kicked the bucket on the farm, right?
Kick the ball in the field.
Yeah, goal unit.
I had a touchdown.
And I think that is where you're going to get the organizational part of it, right? If I have objectives across teams, or we have governance standards, or even if it's two different entities, right? A COE is just the strategy, and you have different implementation teams, like a data governance team or whatever. Like, that would be a great place for coming together in the shared objectives of what are we trying to do within our domains, and what are the biggest things we need to move towards together, so that the objectives of the company can be met for the quarter, for the the half
100%.
year, whatever. So yeah, I would 100% agree that there's and it's interesting you say bottom up, but I would also say, like, some structure or organization around bringing those people together, because they're going to be the ones that take those and move initiatives into the teams or domains, right? Because along with ownership comes the responsibility, but
Right.
also the thoughts, ideas, and management of how you go about building the data frameworks that are going to support not just your teams, but the rest of the organization. You'd never know that outside of those areas. And it's also a great place for, what we talked about previously with Mike saying, like, ways in which you can teach people to be
Yes.
better about certain things, or
Yes.
allows the capabilities of central teams to build scalable things for those teams, right? Hey, here's a testing framework. We haven't said it yet in this podcast. Here's a notebook that you can run through, like, plug in your things, and here's your output so you can validate your data. Here's the next initiative, coming out of the COE that we all want to introduce and implement into all our processes. Oh, by the way, like, and this is to go along with the efforts you're doing with your teams to build organizational objects of certified data that just increase the value of the insights that we can get together.
I agree with this one. And I was writing here while you guys were both talking. I kind of wrote down, like, things that we should know. Like, so we're kind of getting closer here on time on the end of this episode. So I'm just going to kind of go through the list of things. Like, you asked a question, going way back, Tom, to your question.
Yeah.
What are the skills of the leader in the domain? And I think I'm just going to throw out some items here that I think are important. They need to understand the difference between the different users in the workspace. What's an admin? What's a member? What's a contributor? So they need to know what person should fit those elements inside their collection of workspaces. That's one thing they should know. They should understand how to certify data. What does that look like? Because that's a delegated feature we can give them. What does that mean? And what is certified? I think that's something that should be communicated. And I think actually that's an education point that comes from the Center of Excellence. The Center of Excellence should define, this is how we define certified data. This is what you do to it. And there's some rules around it, right? If it's certified, it's got an owner. It has a contact us. It has an email help list. It has, like, these things, right? You have some identifiers. These are requirements to make sure that this data is certified. That's very well documented. I think you should also know how to add or remove more workspaces from the domains. You should be able to know how to deploy a data product, whether it's using deployment pipeline like dev, test, prod, or you should understand, okay, our organization saves the PBIX files in SharePoint, but we deploy them into dev, and then we use a deployment pipeline to move them through the different environments, right? I think that's something that this person is going to need to know and understand how to do. They're not doing the work, maybe, but they're managing the workspaces that are a part of that solution. So they need to understand it at least. The last thing I would say here is the user should understand all the different requirements around what is acceptable for sharing data. How do I share internally? Do I use an org app or a regular app? Because now we have an org app as one of the things that we can use now inside our workspaces. Do we share reports directly? How does all that get managed? Right. So I think there's another element of they should be focusing on that. So I think there are a lot more of if I had to put my hand around it, domain owners are a lot about understanding the processes that you need to make a workspace work or a team of workspaces work. Anything I missed in there that would be like things they must know, you think? Like physical things about PowerBI.com. I'm focusing on, like, things you should know of Power BI or
I think
the website.
One thing I would add in there too is I think there's also the cosmetic side where if you have a collection of workspaces, not necessarily it's your responsibility per se, that individual, But you should also be making sure that there's a common or consistent design, right? Where when we have a production level report, it actually follows some production level guidelines from a design point of view, rather than the ones that are, hey, these are completely gray with 18 filters on it, but this person makes really good reports. I feel like I would want my domain leader to be somewhat responsible to making sure that there's consistent designs across it. That may be asking it too much, but I think that's always been a near and dear to my heart, making sure there's some consistent design or guidelines around that.
I mean, you know, it's near and dear to ours as well.
I know that. Yeah,
I
I had a
don't.
pixel.
Yeah, I mean, you could throw everything up under this. I guess the way I look at this conversation was more data centric.
Yeah.
My kind of final thoughts are kind of around yours, Mike. Just in what would I expect of this individual, and I think it changed. There's still some wiggle room, like with small shops to large org, right? But first and foremost, they're the subject matter experts of the business area. And they're able to communicate with all the teams about their area and the data that's coming out of their domain, because they do that today, whether that's their local machine, Excel files, etc. Right? Like this is their business area. They should own the objectives of the organization and the domain and everything that is responsible, their responsibilities for delivering things to the organization, which I love. Like this in many respects, I think a lot of business, or the way this could be a biased viewpoint from the IT side. It very much feels like business is always asking, right? And in this case, these units are both giving and taking, right?
Yes.
You have to deliver for other people to be successful. You are responsible for hitting those timelines, and others are doing the same for you, because collectively we work together as an organization to make us successful, not your team or my team. And I think in general, any opportunity businesses have to do that or create much more of a collaborative environment across teams is always beneficial. Third point, the learn parts. Mike, you hit this much more in detail than I did. Fabric ecosystem relevant to their team, right? You don't need to know the whole thing, but like you need to know the areas of structure and how to set things up, the data ingestion methodologies, where you're going to be learning a lot, hopefully from the central teams. And you'll know business processes, but I think those will expand and change as you're implementing and utilizing Fabric as part of that ecosystem of the things that you're responsible in delivering for. And then like kind of the be part of, Tommy, I loved your point. And I agree 100%. Like they should be part of data governance or an organizational team that gets together, that is talked to about the objectives of the organization, what the overall goals are, and how they plug in, so that those people can then share down with the wider audience underneath those domains. Or if they're single users, then that's the value of what they're bringing to the organization, even in their knowledge, right? Hey, spend time with our technical people, because the information you're providing, or the outputs and documentation and all the things, are allowing us to develop much faster. And like there's a net benefit to the organization that we're bringing you into and letting you see, as well as share some responsibility in.
Awesome. One thing I'll just point out here as well, this is also going to be in the description of this video as well. There's actually a really good blog post from the Microsoft Fabric blog. One of the community members jumped in and gave a easily implement data mesh architecture with domains in Fabric. It was produced in February of 2024, so it's a bit old. There's probably been some features and some changes to domains that have come out, but it seems, in general, the concepts seem very simple here. Like it seems very straightforward, and it seems to kind of align this whole data mesh. One thing that's interesting here is you don't find a lot of language in the Microsoft documentation around the thing called data mesh. They talk a lot about other things and, democratization of data and distributing and sharing, but they really don't have this. They don't have like articles specifically talking about data mesh, which I think, again, this is the same thing as what I would say medallion architecture is. It's a methodology. It's not necessarily like a product or tool, a thing. It's something that you can follow to help your company work well with data. All right. That being said, I think we're pretty much at time here. We've kind of exhausted this one pretty well. So I appreciate everyone listening here. If you like this conversation, if you're not using domains, I'd highly recommend go read up on them. Go figure out what domains are doing. If you're a medium to larger size organization, I think those are good candidates for where you may want to apply domains. delegate some of your central BI team things to other team members across the domain space. So that should be something I think, if nothing else, your center of excellence is talking about, at least having a conversation around how do we utilize or leverage domains to share responsibility and ownership across your organization. With that, what our only ask is, if you please would just share this with somebody else. If you like this topic, you thought this was relevant, please share with somebody else so they can also enjoy in the conversation around domains. That being said, Tommy, where else can you find the podcast?
Well, you can find us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. Make sure to subscribe and leave a rating. It helps us out a ton. If you have a question, an idea, or a topic that you want us to talk about in a future episode, head over to powerbi.tips/podcast. Leave your name and a great question. And finally, join us live every Tuesday and Thursday, 7:30 a.m. Central, and join the conversation on all powerbi.tips social media channels.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you next time.